Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Ira Idle, and we are approaching the end of the neurodiversity movement's history up until now. There's a lot to talk about as usual, as we are catching up to the present day. It's been fun putting these together, though I will be glad to say that I completed this series. Finishing something you started is nice. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Timeline wise, I am covering the mid 2010s to the present day, which is June 2022 as of writing this. The neurodiversity movement is still really young, so it's entirely possible when going through its history chronologically to go from the beginning to middle to end pretty quickly. To give you some perspective, I was not born yet when this movement started. Now I am 24. So during the majority of this movement's history, I have gone through daycare, preschool, elementary school, middle school, high school, and college. So if you've been involved with the neurodiversity movement since the beginning, then that may make you feel a bit old, or maybe not. This part is more of a footnote from the last chapter, as it was in the early 2010s, but it's very important to talk about. The fifth edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM-V, brought with it some key changes. Really, talking about the DSM in general is very important to all forms of neurodivergence, though the change being highlighted here is how autism is diagnosed. Asperger's syndrome was removed as a diagnosis. Pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified, PDD-NOS, was also combined into autism as a result. Now everything autism related is just autism, or as they like to call it, autism spectrum disorder. So this was done for several reasons. There was there was lots of pushback from self-advocates to make this change happen. As autistic communities were growing alongside the neurodiversity movement, it became more and more obvious that people were using Asperger's as a way to separate oneself from people who are really autistic, and either imply or outright state that people with an Asperger's diagnosis were more valuable than those with an autism diagnosis. This is but one form of what's called Aspie supremacy. We've talked about things like Aspergia and Aspies for freedom in previous chapters. Aspie supremacy is not always blatant, but it is a pervasive issue within autistic spaces. Asperger's was always meant to be a functioning label, implying a hierarchy of disability that has been present since institutions existed. When you rank someone's autism diagnosis based on their level of autism, it will inevitably lead to this. There are also many people who have an Asperger's diagnosis but may also exhibit traits of classic autism. Same goes with someone deemed high functioning who may still require lots of support. Ultimately, it's just not helpful to have functioning labels. They were never strictly in the DSM, though the existence of Asperger's as a separate diagnosis was a form of functioning labels. There are also concerns over Hans Asperger's being a Nazi. Obviously, that's not a good thing, but the names of many disabilities have problematic origins. What really mattered was Aspie's supremacy, not necessarily who the diagnosis was named after. The people who published the DSM are known as the American Psychological Association, the APA. ASA, particularly R. Amon and Stephen Kapp, lobbied for Asperger's to be removed between 2009 and 2012. Even though there was a critical mass of autistic people who supported the change to the DSM, plenty of autistic people did not and still do not. One such example was Michael John Carley from Grasp. Yep, him again. He said he was going to have a very hard time calling himself autistic. He said Asperger's included people like Albert Einstein and Thomas Edison, while autism included people who might have to wear adult diapers and maybe a head restraining device. This is not only gross, but I think it's a common rebuttal used by people who are in favor of having separate diagnoses for autism. I know Temple Grandin would agree with Carly's sentiment. Carly apparently changed his mind later, though Grasp did have a Change.org petition that got about 9,000 signatures for the autism diagnosis to not be narrowed down. Another reason for supporting this revision was to close the gaps in service provision, since people with an Asperger's diagnosis would get different kinds of service than those with an autism diagnosis. This still very much happens. It just looks different. So what was the impact? Well, Asperger's and the colloquial term Aspie are much more frowned upon in autism spaces than they once were. I think the DSM revision has some to do with that, but I think it also has some to do with a cultural shift. Many people still hold on to the Asperger's label for a number of reasons. It's still a diagnosis in some parts of the world, for one. It seems like the most common reason for advocates, at least on social media, to reject Asperger's is because of Hans Asperger being a Nazi rather than because it's a functioning label. While Asperger's was removed, there are still a myriad of concerns many have with how the DSM defines autism. It still very much defines autism from a deficit based perspective, for one. It also now has levels for autism, which denote how much support someone may require. Now, granted, ASAN's advocacy did make the levels less harmful than they could have been, as the DSMV says levels shouldn't be used for eligibility for service provision. It's still functioning levels by another name. And it was a hill that the APA would die on with the DSMV. The APA is extremely problematic, and a diagnosis can lead to mistreatment instead of getting proper services. But it's still good that Asperger's and autism are no longer separate diagnoses in the United States. It did not end Aspie supremacy, though it weakened it, if ever so slightly. There's still much work to be done. Alright, so now it's time to talk about neurotribes. Several books on autism have been published. You can view ones published by autistic people and allies under the books section of Autistic Archive, though this particular book was quite influential. It was published by Steve Silverman, who is not autistic himself, though he has worked closely with autistic people in the neurodiversity movement. He found a lot of parallels between the neurodiversity movement and his experience as a gay man in the gay rights movement. Neurotribes was published in 2015 and became a New York Times bestseller. This was a book that not only talks about the history of autism, but does so from a pro neurodiversity perspective. So, for it to have the reach that it did was beneficial to the cause. Steve later got Ally of the Year award from ASAN for his work. A book about the history of autism is very relevant to my line of work. So, what do I think about this? I have a lot to say about neurotribes, both good and bad. So now the general public had access to a more nuanced understanding of autism and the history behind it with this book, as well as autistic people themselves who may not have been aware. Steve certainly has a particular writing style, and it may be a turnoff for some people. Neurotribes is, I think, where a lot of modern day discourse on autism comes from, namely the connection between ABA and conversion therapy, as well as Asperger being a Nazi. Those things were not widely known before, even among autistic spaces. The book does praise Asperger for seeing the competence in some of his autistic patients and painted him as an outlier rather than complicit within the Nazi Party. It later was discovered that he was quite complicit, and to his credit, Steve has since acknowledged this. It's a very long book, being longer than 600 pages. If you're a bookworm and frequently read, then that's good news. If you have a shorter attention span, which many autistic people have, it may be a harder book to finish. I own a copy and have read most of it, though it's taken me several years to get through it, and that's for a number of reasons. For one, it's for similar reasons as to why there are so many books, games, and series I haven't finished procrastination. Otherwise, it's because of how the book is. The best way I can describe Neurotribes is thick. Not just because it's long, but because it goes over content that is a lot to take in, as much of it describes instances of institutionalization, pathologization, and eugenics, among other things. That's not necessarily Steve's fault, it's just how the history of autism is. I think it certainly could have been more condensed than it is, and a plain language version would also be great. It talks a decent amount about the neurodiversity movement, but it talks more about the history of autism itself, which is certainly important to know, though my specialty lies more in the history of autistic communities and the neurodiversity movement. So if you're looking for that, I recommend Stephen Kapp's Autistic Community and Neurodiversity Movement textbook more than I do Neurotribes. Eric Garcia's We're Not Broken, Changing the Autism Narrative also talks about autism history a great deal. The use of the word tribe is also peculiar and may be seen as appropriation of indigenous cultures by some. I can't say for sure though. So Neurotribes is overall a good book. It has a few issues here and there, but I do still recommend it as an introduction to autism history. This is a funny little incident that created an inside joke for some autistic spaces, and it's honestly my favorite symbol for autism. A user on Facebook named Johnny Orr wrote a song about autism. He was the friend of a parent of an autistic kid, so his relationship to autism was quite tangential. The song included a lot of dehumanizing language that autistic people took issue with. John found the post and defended it, saying the song was not for people on the light end of the spectrum, like the ones who were supposedly criticizing him. A supporter of his then chimed in, asking, "So am I to elicit that I cannot paint about being a giraffe because I am not a giraffe?" Cassiana was on this forum and fired back with, "If you aren't a lamp, you should probably not write about being one, no." What ensued was a playful conversation about a giraffe with a lampshade on its head or a party hat. Maxfield Sparrow made some drawings of what became known as the Autistic Party Giraffe. There are so many things I love about this, whether it's how the person who wrote the song wasn't even a relative of an autistic person, or the way the autistic people involved had a field day with the party giraffe, or even simply because I love giraffes. The autistic party giraffe to me represents so many things about the neurodiversity movement. The struggle for autistic people to take control of their own narrative and the playful conversations autistic people often have with each other. It just feels like the whole package. And it's a giraffe. So next up we have the neurodivergent narwhals. This is another autism symbol I really love. These are the brainchild of Lee Wiley Midsky, who runs the Ed Wiley Autism Acceptance Lending Library. The narwhals are part of this project. She's created a number of infographics and social stories using the narwhals, and they're all great. The narwhals are very cute, but I also remember seeing this particular graphic here when I was a rookie in the community. The symptoms of autism as portrayed in the DSM never sat right with me. So when I saw this, it was such a relief to see autism traits described in a non-pathologizing way. That coupled with the adorable narwhals just really sold it for me. So I love these narwhals and hope they continue to educate people about autism from a neurodiversity affirming perspective for years to come. It's time. Hold on. It's time to talk about Autism Speaks again. So I've been pretty hard on them in the other videos, and you may have been watching them thinking, I wonder when he's going to mention how they've changed. And here you go. So yes, they have rebranded their organization in recent years. Previously, their leadership had reactionary conservatives with ties to Trump, though it was mostly before he ran for president. Liz Feld acted as their president for a while, and Bob and Suzanne Wright were, of course, involved. Between 2015 and 2016, Feld stepped down, Suzanne Wright died of pancreatic cancer, and Bob Wright exited the organization too. So this led to a new leadership, and with that leadership came a change to their mission statement where they removed any mention of a cure and with a supposed dedication to promoting understanding and acceptance of autism. They also appointed two autistic people to their board of directors, Stephen Shore and Valerie Paradis. Their PSA started moving away from the fear-based rhetoric and adopted a friendlier tone. Then in 2020, they changed their logo to a multicolored puzzle piece, possibly being representative of the neurodiversity gradient, and started a campaign for kindness. They also have had several resignations in the past year in key leadership positions and just appointed a new CEO this fall. So does this mean that they've changed for the better and are no longer a controversial organization within the neurodiversity movement? The short answer is absolutely not. As for the longer answer, there's still so much wrong with their organization, and I don't think any kind of course correction they may do will fix that at this point. I think the time window for that has long passed, if it was ever there in the first place. So, yes, they have autistic people in leadership positions now. Worth mentioning, though, is that Valerie was later promoted to leadership, and according to her LinkedIn profile, she has now completely left the organization. So now it's just Steven on their board. They've always been very particular with the autistic people they chose to promote and listen to, and it's always been the ones who aren't too radical and are respectable enough to not seriously challenge Autism Speaks. But also, two, now one, autistics on a board of nearly 30 people is laughable at best. It's also blatant tokenism. John Elder Robinson was a board member for a few years when the rights were still involved, but then left after Suzanne gave a speech that portrayed autistic people as missing. Robinson himself has a lot of issues, but that's not relevant here. Autism Speaks still supports ABA and, in fact, is probably one of the field's biggest supporters. They did a whole lobbying campaign across all 50 states to mandate insurance coverage of ABA, and seem to be continuing to push for even more coverage of ABA. Many ABA centers across the country receive grants from them too. They published a few blog posts as recently as last year that talked about the controversies surrounding ABA and why the criticisms are inaccurate. They are still running their genomic sequencing program MSSNG, where they are looking into the biological causes of autism to develop more personalized interventions. I don't know why you would need to know the cause of autism and what a personalized intervention from biological research could mean other than curing autism or selective abortion. I am pro choice, but I think that if a genetic marker for autism is somehow discovered, which I don't think it will for the record, at least not a single one, then it will inevitably lead to that, as it has with other disabilities. There's a new podcast they sponsor called Adulting on the Spectrum, which is ran by two autistic people, though it's mostly them talking about how militant and dangerous the neurodiversity movement is, and how ABA is supposedly good. So it's just another front for Autism Speaks to spread their talking points. They're just using autistic people to do it for them now. They don't own the podcast, but the fact that they're willing to sponsor it says all that needs to be said. There's now an FAQ on their website where they address common criticisms of their organization, and a lot of it shows an unwillingness to change their mind on things like using the puzzle piece, supporting ABA, having more autistic people represented in their leadership, and they even state that some autistic people cannot advocate for themselves. So you tell me if their core beliefs have truly changed. The fact that they presented their old puzzle piece with a few more colors added and called that a new and improved logo is hilarious. They also support sheltered workshops and show an autistic person working at one in a recent PSA. Anytime they do something that sounds good on the surface level, and as soon as you take a closer look, it becomes apparent, at least to me, that they always seem to royally screw it up. I don't think redemption, at least in the eye of the neurodiversity movement, is even remotely possible for Autism Speaks. Some people do actually think they've changed for the better and that they're doing enough to address past mistakes to be worth collaborating with. They are certainly welcome to their opinion, but I clearly do not share it. I think the recent changes boil down to this: they are rebranding so that they can stay relevant in the public eye, though what they actually do as an organization has not changed. The narrative about autism has indeed shifted in the past decade, in no small part due to the neurodiversity movement, and it's becoming increasingly more frowned upon to talk about autism as a terrible, child stealing, marriage ruining disease. As a massive nonprofit, Autism Speaks probably had no choice but to rebrand unless they wanted to die with the past. Their relevance has dwindled, if slightly, in recent years despite rebranding, so that's encouraging to hear. As a whole, I don't think any commercial as a whole, I don't think any commercial charity claiming to be for people with disabilities that are run by wealthy philanthropists are going to be particularly good. I am personally not a fan of these kinds of organizations. So from the get-go, I think an organization like Autism Speaks was destined to be controversial on the grassroots level, and I think it's safe to say it will continue to be for years to come. I definitely want them to disband, but the more likely scenario at this point is that they become less relevant. Here we have a documentary called Citizen Autistic. It was directed by William Davenport. It's available for free online. It's about an hour long and features many people involved with ASAN being interviewed about the politics of autism. It also shows people protesting Autism Speaks walks. You even get to see Zoe Gross speaking to President Obama about self-advocacy. She received the Champion of Change for People with Disabilities award along with Lydia Brown. There's also some stuff about Stop the Shock. There was going to be a second film, though it was never released. One thing of note is that Citizen Autistic was produced by Cinema Libre, who also produced Vax and Vax 2, which are anti-vaccination documentaries. I'm not sure why they'd support these people, especially since they produce a documentary that comes from a diametrically opposed point of view. But regardless, this is why you should just watch it for free. It was uploaded by Davenport himself, so it's not like you're pirating it. The recent years have seen an increase in autistic people involved in journalism, which is a big deal. This includes major outlets such as the Washington Post and The Hill. These three people pictured here from left to right are Sarah Luderman, Eric Garcia, and Zach Budrup. This is not at all an exhaustive list, but I think these three people in particular have done a lot of great work in the field of journalism when it comes to raising awareness of the neurodiversity movement. The way autism is portrayed in media is still very flawed, and most of it is negative, but it's great that there are autistic people out there making a difference by reporting about autism in a more accurate and respectful manner. Disability isn't all they write about, but I do think they do a great job when they do. I also find many autistic journalists to be very likable. Journalism is something I've thought about as a career path, being a writer, but I don't know if I'm ever seriously considering it. I guess you'll know if that changes. NOS magazine ran for a few years, from around 2015 to 2018. The NOS is derived from the not otherwise specified of PAD NOS. It was a news and commentary source for thought and analysis about neurodiversity, diversity, culture, and representation. The contributors were not exclusively autistic, though it was autistic led. Sarah Luderman was the editor. There's some really great stuff here, and it's a shame that they've been defunct for a few years. The funding ran out. All three people I mentioned in the last slide were involved, and most of the contributors were fairly well known advocates within the disability rights and neurodiversity movements. Thinking Person's Guide to Autism is thankfully still active. Around the time NOS magazine ended, another autistic led blogging site was started, initially called The Aspergian, later changing their name to Neuroclastic. Compared to NOS and TBGA, they're not as good, to put it charitably. NOS magazine has great articles that cover all kinds of things and had editorial guidelines. Contributors were paid too. Sarah is very experienced in journalism, so I think that made it all the stronger. These next two slides are going to feature some autistic self-advocacy organizations outside of the United States. Now, autistic self-advocacy itself has been around in the rest of the global north for the entire time it's been around in the United States. As far as Canada goes, I've talked about Michelle Dawson and Estee Clark's contributions to the movement, both of whom are Canada-based. When ASAM did chapters, there was one in Vancouver. However, these two organizations seem to have really increased the movement's influence as of late. They are Autistics United Canada, and Autistics for Autistics. They are both ASAN affiliate groups, so it shows that ASAN is having some international influence, though Canada is in the Americas, so it's not that wide of a net. They have a group in New Zealand too, though it's still based in the global north. I'm sure that'll change with time, but it's worth noting. The red and A for A's logo clashes a bit with the red background of my slides, so sorry if that makes it harder to see. It's a slightly different shade of red, so it may not be an issue. Anyway, both of them are involved in advocating for better autism policy in Canada. They have different chapters spread across Canada's different provinces. There's a push for ABA service in Canada like there is in the US, though I believe it's not as widespread as at this point as it is here. I know there's a parent-led movement to get kids off waitlists for ABA called Autism Doesn't End at Ford, referencing Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario. I don't think these parents realize what they're asking for, but that's just me. I know there are also ongoing tensions with the Canadian autism strategy, which seems to not be on the side of the neurodiversity movement. Autistics United does more policy work, though, also doing plenty of community engagement, more than policy work, also doing community engagement and some mutual aid. Vivian Lee is the director of Autistics United and does an excellent job. I've had the pleasure of working with Viv before. Viv is great. Ann Borden King is the director of A4A and is also great, and someone I have frequently collaborated with. The United Kingdom has seen plenty of autistic self-advocacy as well. There was previously APANA, among others. It's also worth noting that Aspergia and Aspies for Freedom were started by people based in the UK. Europe has a number of autistic-led organizations. These two in particular seem to have a decent amount of influence. There's really one main reason I bring up these particular organizations, which I'll get to in a bit. Autistic UK was started in 2014, and Autistic Inclusive Meets AIM was in 2017. AIM was founded by Emma Dalmain and has a USA chapter that absorbed what was left of Fierce Autistics and Allies. They do some campaigning, including protests, as well as socials for autistic kids and autistic parents. Autistic UK works to represent autistic people in the places where devices are designed, decisions are made, and whole communities are affected. They credit themselves as the first autistic campaigning organization in the UK. So, other than both of them being UK based, there's another reason I wanted to mention these two together. Not because they're closely related per se, they do not seem to be, but because of their use of the color gold. Gold has become a popular color among certain autistic groups, though it's been around for a long time. I talked about this a bit in the last chapter, but want to elaborate further. Autistic UK is the first organization I've found to use the gold infinity symbol as well as lighted up gold. These built off of the rainbow symbol Aspects for Freedom created and the Red Instead campaign in the US. AIM also utilizes a lot of the gold. People often affiliated with lighting up gold like to use the pointy letters for A and U, resulting in a moniker that reads AU. I've always thought it was really weird, and it doesn't seem to mean much outside of social media, mainly Facebook. It symbolizes these 10 principles and that you're part of some autistic union. The people who use it tend to be very opportunistic, in my experience. The gold also gives off Ask supremacist vibes, honestly, especially since they feel the need to use their own colors for autism instead of just the rainbow for all neurodivergence. Now, most people I know who use the gold also use the rainbow, but I honestly don't see a good reason to use the gold to distinguish autism from other cognitive disabilities. It also reminds me of the shiny Ashby archetype. I don't know if most of these people involved with this intend to perpetuate these ideas, so I will say that for me, I cringe whenever I see the pointy letters. There's always room for improvement for everyone, even the people I look up to the most. At the very least, it's good to see that the neurodiversity movement isn't just confined to the borders of the United States. I wanted to quickly mention the Autistics Present Symposium. It's done annually at Bellevue College, sponsored by Neurodiversity Navigators, and mirrors Autreat in a lot of ways. The first symposium was in 2017, and the most recent one was all virtual last year. It's very well put together and has panels on important topics. I might go to the next one in person. It's in Washington State, so quite far away from me, and in a different time zone, but I'm sure it's worth it. In 2017, Donald Trump was sworn in as President of the United States. One of his priorities, as well as the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, was to repeal the Affordable Care Act and make some budget cuts to Medicaid. The name of the legislation that would have been the catalysts to this were the Better Care and Reconciliation Act, BCRA, and the American Health Care Act, AHCA. A lot of disabled people rely on Medicaid to get the services they need in the community rather than institutions. This was something that was important to all of the disability rights sub-movements and sub-communities, so they banded together in an unprecedented effort to occupy Capitol Hill, specifically Mitch McConnell's office, in protest of these proposed cuts. ASAN, Nickel, ADAPT, and even the ACLU, among others, all came together for this. It demonstrates neurodiversity having a place alongside the greater disability rights movement. One of the things they chanted was, "No cuts to Medicaid, save our liberty." Plenty of autistic people were involved in these protests, including representatives from ASAN. You can see on the left here a picture of Ari Naaman, Zoe Gross, and Kelly Israel. I pulled it from Facebook. They're holding a sign that's half humorous, half serious that says, "Autistics Against BCRA, please save our healthcare so we can stop making phone calls." Anita Cameron is in the picture on the right. Many people in wheelchairs showed up to the Hill, and the Capitol Police carried them out of their wheelchairs, which is pretty callous, uh, um, though which is pretty callous, though the direct action was deliberately planned by ADAPT, as that is their specialty. The protests were successful, and the ACA was not repealed. So we've talked a lot so far in this chapter. We've talked about a lot so far in this chapter, and I'm not even halfway through with these slides. I think I've covered enough for one video. So I'm going to end it here so you can take a breather, maybe go outside, stim, drink water, eat, whatever. Or if you're watching this in the future, go immediately to the next video. The next video will be the last one in the series. Stay tuned.